Dear students, this week we are going to talk about the two agreements, and the first one is agreement on sanitary and phytosanitary measures and the technical barriers to trade. And today's lecture we are going to examine the agreement on sanitary and phytosanitary measures, popularly known as SPS agreement. So, and also we will see that what is this agreement, what is the concept of sanitary and phytosanitary, then what is really the problem, and the export rejections from India is a concern. It is a concern for not only for exporters as a country, it affects the reputation of the country as a destination of export. So, we will see some of the rejections, and then we will see the other codes like the Kennedy round code, what was the provisions on SPS, then Tokyo round, and then what is the standards. So, SPS standards. So, this we are going to cover in the today's lecture. So, when we talk about SPS agreement, so what is the problem persisting now? So, how the consumers in a country can be protected, and it means how safe food can be provided to them, or safe food products can be given to them, and what are the regulations. The countries uses domestic regulations, and SPS agreement is a uniform minimum standards which is to be obliged by all member countries, 164 WTO member countries at their domestic level. But it is up to the member countries to adopt a standard. It can be international standard, it can be their own standard, and the standard is not mentioned in the SPS agreement. So, according to the economic conditions or the circumstances of every country, they can adopt their own standards. But the members agreed that from taking into the clue from the previous agreements, that is the Kennedy round and the Tokyo round, and Tokyo round, Kennedy round, there was a code, and Tokyo round elaborate code, and then the Uruguay round come out with the SPS agreement, sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, which includes three components. And the first component is with regard to the food safety, and second definitely with regard to animal health, and the third component which deals with the plant health. So, the SPS agreement deals with the three areas of protection. Now, so if you look into the acute problem, so this is the 2023 data. So, it says that around 3,925 human food shipments were rejected by only by one country, or it's one of the largest trading partner, that is United States. So, even though China is the largest trading partner, they are second in rejection. So, you can imagine that China rejects the food items, and the largest rejection is from the US, and the US Food and Drug Administration has rejected so far for the last 3-4 years around almost 4,000. So, average if you take into consideration, around 1,000 consignments are rejected per year. It is a concern. It is a concern for India as an export destination, because this is going to affect the image of the country as an export destination of various products. And especially we can see some of the areas like spices, and India is one of the largest exporter of spices all over the world, but recently you can see there is a lot of rejections, and we will see one by one. See, out of these shipments around in 2023 around 1,000 shipments so far, around 24% shipments are refused entry, even refused entry by showing the reason that it is filthy. See, you are talking about the Quality Council of India is there to take care of the quality of the food which are exported, but 24% of the consignments are rejected on the ground that it is filthy. And most importantly, contaminants. So, you can see that another 20% of the shipments are refused entry by showing containing salmonella. Everybody knows that salmonella is a very serious disease causing organism, a bacteria which causes severe stomach infections. Salmonella bacteria in 20% of the exports, that are also food exports that people eat. So, other categories which includes spices, vitamins, minerals, proteins, bakery products, bakery items and seafood products. And also see some of the cases, we can see that it is not the US that rejected. China is the largest trading partner of India, and the products which includes foods, personal care products, health categories, supplement and also including. So, you can see some of the products rejected includes multinational companies like Hindustan Liver, so Nestle, Britannia and our popular the snacks manufacturer Haldiram. So, this it shows that a single company, for example, the snacks making company or the food ready to eat food making company, 53 consignments, one company is rejected. So, this shows there is some serious problems not only in food. So, you can see a 2022 news item which says that Iran and Taiwan rejected Indian tea shipments citing phytosanitary issues. I was going through this particular news item and checked what is in it. So, these countries find that there is excessive pesticide residues, in tea. So, where we are going? So, as if you want to an export destination and you must be providing the goods including food items with some kind of international standards, and international standards in conformity with the standards of the exporting the importing country. And also we can see this is a very very recent news in October, and it says that the food exports refused 7 times higher than China, the US food exports. So, US everybody knows that US is a country with a high standard of food standards, high standard of items, and I was going through this, what is this rejected? A majority of the items rejected by are spices, and spices belongs to a particular company, a particular spice making one of the largest spice making company in India, that is MDH. And the news item says that 10% of their shipments are rejected. And what is the reason? They said mostly as you can see that salmonella, again salmonella is a villain in most of the food products as well as spices. So, the contamination by salmonella, and then even you can see that the multinational company products like noodles are rejected. So, the reason which they have given is it is filthy. Remember, this is the standard which is adopted if by the multinational companies in India, so then nobody can help them, and the bad name comes back to India as an export destination. So, these items, so I told you these items and other items, there is a long list of items rejected by other countries, that including food, fried snacks, bakery products, spices and tamarind and other paste, then basmati rice. So, basmati rice is one of the geographical indication product which is have a high reputation all over the world, but that also get a bad name, then it will be severely going to affect the exports from India. And other items which you can see, the seafood items, soft drinks, fisheries items, botanical items, medicines and even bath soaps and detergents are rejected products. So, what you are going to export? So, what is the basic problem? The basic problem is your product standards or food standards. So, in this background, we will see the WTO agreement on sanitary and phytosanitary measures. So, what is the objective? The objective of the agreement is specially mentioned in the agreement. It says that, so SPS agreement allows the WTO members to set their own standards of food safety, animal safety and plant safety or plant health, animal health and plant health. So, but these standards adopted by the member countries must be in accordance based on science, and it can be applicable only to the extent of protecting human, animal or plant life or health. So, it means no arbitrary unjustifiable discrimination between countries on same product, similar products or like products. So, the SPS agreement clearly says the objective of SPS agreement is to protect human health, animal health and plant health, and also protect from other risk, and the risk arising from additives, contaminants, toxins, disease causing organisms in food beverages. When it comes to the human life, again to animal life, the animals carries various diseases, zoonosis, and it is to protect human life from these animal diseases and protect animal and plant life from pest diseases and disease causing organisms which is contaminated or transmitted from other countries. And when entering into other country, the minimum damage, for example, the spread of pest. So, sanitary and phytosanitary mainly focus on human health, animal health and plant health. So, here human or animal health is basically looking into the risk from additives, contaminant, toxins, disease causing organisms, food, drink, foodstuff, etc. Then human life from plant and animal carried diseases, and animal and plant from pest, diseases and disease causing organisms. And as a territory, so minimum damage to a particular territory with the infestation of a particular pest or other disease causing organisms in a region of a member country. So, we can see that these measures are taken under the SPS agreement to protect human beings, animals and plant health. So, it is the objectives and purposes of SPS agreement are clearly says to protect human, animal or plant life or health, provided they do not discriminate or use this as a disguised protectionism. So, article 20 of the GATT itself clearly says what is the purpose of SPS measure, and mainly the SPS agreement dealing with the food safety, animal and plant life and product standards. So, we will see in another lecture about the product standards which are created by the Codex Alimentarius Commission, who is an international designated authority by the Food and Agriculture Organization to form international standards. And also it is very important to see that how the member countries are implementing these provisions at the domestic level. So, the objective and purpose of SPS agreement is clearly laid down. So, the purpose saying it is to protect from animal life risk arising from additives, contaminants, and we saw this again, toxins and disease causing organisms, and at the same time human life from animal and plant carried diseases which may be carried from other country or other country means the exporting country to the importing country. And these animals and plants from pests and diseases and other disease causing organisms from the again exporting country. So, minimum damage to a particular region as well. So, the purpose is very clear about the SPS agreement, and the agreement which seems that very clearly talks about what is its objective, the twofold objectives. The twofold objectives are: every member country have the sovereign right to adopt their own standards subject to the principle of non-discrimination. And at the same time, the second objective is adoption of such standards should not be unjustifiable, it should not be arbitrary, it should not be scientifically unjustifiable or restrictions, unnecessary restrictions on international trade. It should not put unnecessary restrictions on international trade. So, every country can have their own higher standards, of this protection, but that should not make as an obstacle to trade. And also we can see that sanitary and phytosanitary measures, all relevant laws relating to SPS, regulations and requirements and the end product criteria, process and product methods, testing, inspection, all this will include SPS measures. So, the barriers can be put on any one stage. So, all these includes all these includes the SPS measures. And the criteria, the condition, the only condition put on such SPS measures are: it must be based on scientific evidence and proper risk assessment, and it must not create any sort of unjustified barrier for trade, and it should not create any restrictions in international trade. So, the objective and purpose is very clear about the SPS agreement. So, and at the same time you can see that every country have a right to protect human, animal and plant health and life. So, the SPS agreement very clearly says every countries have the sovereign right to adopt any standard of protection to their people, animals and plants. So, we said that all the measures must be based on scientific evidence. What does it mean? All the restrictions put by a particular member country should be based on scientific evidence. So, for example, what has happened in the EU beef hormone case, and we will see those cases later, and you cannot simply ban beef by saying that it is treated with hormones, and this beef is harmful to human health. So, what you have to do? You have to prove scientifically, you have to prove that this hormone treated beef is harmful to human beings. So, it must be based on scientific principles, and it can be applied only to the extent to protect human, animal or plant life or health. It cannot be made it as a barrier to trade, and scientific evidence is a must. So, and also scientific evidence is a must for any such kind of actions by the members. Scientific justification is required. If you look into the this very latest data from the WTO, which says from 1995 to 2023, how many such notifications are comes to the WTO or with regard to SPS measures, and the members notified around 32,370 SPS measure and 49,215 TBT measure. So, we will see the next coming lectures what is the TBT measure. So, 32,370 measures are initiated by the members, SPS measures. So, this shows that how they are serious about food safety and standards. And so far you can see that there are 14 disputes, and you can see some of the 14 disputes came before the WTO dispute settlement panel. And also you can see that trade concerns, the members are raised more than 500 trade concerns. So, that means they have raised the points of barriers more than 500, more than 500. So, around 50 disputes started by end up in dispute rulings from 14. It means that only a small percent, maybe 5% of the cases end up in rulings, and all other disputes are sorted out by the members themselves during the negotiating period and during the consultation period. So, the SPS measure, so 32,000 is a big number, and the members are, it shows the members are very much concerned about food safety mechanisms or animal health. They are concerned about the plant health at their domestic level. So, in 2006, so you can see in the picture, this is the cinnamon bark, which is used as a commodity, spice commodity in many food items, and in Sri Lanka this is one of the revenue earning, foreign exchange earning for Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan cinnamon is world famous for their quality, for their aroma, and also for a long tradition of preserving it. So, in 2006, the European Union rejected consignments from Sri Lanka, of cinnamon consignments from Sri Lanka, and the European Union found that there is excessive sulfur dioxide content in the bark. So, from the agriculture department and the from practice of even the European Union has searching that what is the reason, what is the cause of these sulfur dioxide contaminant in the bark of cinnamon. So, they found that during the ripening of mango orchards, like they also use smoke to send out the flies. And like mango orchards, here also they smoke these cinnamon plantations also will be smoked to send out the flies and pests in the plantations. So, in order to increase the intensity of the smoke, they use sulfur dioxide. So, that if you use sulfur in and burn it, and lot of sulfur dioxide as fumes, as smoke will come out and the pest will be out. The cinnamon trees absorbs a part of this sulfur dioxide, and the residues are found in this bark. So, and at that point of time, so the consignment was rejected, and the Sri Lanka requested the WTO to WTO Committee on SPS to form a standard, and the WTO Committee on SPS asked the Codex Alimentarius Commission, the Codex, to formulate a standard on cinnamon, and later the European Union also cooperated with the Codex, and a standard is formed for the pesticide residue or the sulfur residue in the cinnamon bark. So, this is harmonization. So, if there is no standard for a particular product, the Codex, the specialized body under the Food and Agriculture Organization, which makes an international standard for that particular product, whether it is pesticide residue, whether it is contaminant, or it is any other residue, any standard, food standard or any product standard which they make. So, they made the standard, and then later on the Sri Lanka was able to export the famous cinnamon, Sri Lankan cinnamon to the European Union. So, it shows the problem solving capacity of this agreement, SPS agreement. So, it worked very well. So, if there is no standard for any particular product, then definitely the international institutions are there to make the standards to be adopted by. So, the European Union gradually adopted the standard prepared by the codex and the allowed the Sri Lanka to, in conformity with the particular standard, the Sri Lanka also changed the farm practices. So, this is the way the world trade grows. So, this is one of the best example of how this SPS agreement came and the harmonization is made at the domestic level. So, here you can see that the key provisions which talks about non-discrimination, we said every action should be based on scientific justification. The harmonization, which we saw that harmonization principle, then risk assessment, consistency and the measure of trade restrictiveness, then equivalence principles, regionalization, inspection mechanisms and approval procedures, and also the transparency, enquiry points. So, these are some of the provisions we will see elaborately. So, if we look into the SPS agreement, and SPS agreement is not first time, the provisions are first time, not first time comes to the Uruguay round of negotiations. If you look into the Tokyo Round Code of 1979, you can see very clear provisions on SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, to protect human animal health from foodborne risk, human health from animal and plant carrier diseases, animal and plant from pest or diseases, then the protection of a particular region, territory, and then the standards to be adopted to protect fish, fisheries products, forest products, wildlife products, farm products, animal and plants. So, this is the provisions which are adopted to the Uruguay round of negotiations are directly from Tokyo round of negotiations. And the SPS agreement, as we already said, that allows the member countries to set standards on non-discriminatory basis and also based on scientific basis. So, if harmonization is done, as I told you, the Codex Alimentarius is the organization which form international standards and harmonization with Codex standards. So, there is no compulsion from the SPS or WTO to adopt the Codex standards. The Codex standards are the basic standards and the countries are free to adopt their own standard, which will be even a lower one than that of Codex. So, there is no compulsion on the developing countries to adopt the higher Codex standards. Mostly these Codex standards are adopted by the United States and European Union and some other countries. But if you want to export to these particular countries any product, then you have to conformity with the Codex standards. So, it must be based on scientific evidences. So, the harmonization with the Codex standards, the limit for pesticide residues and disease and disease causing organisms and different standards. So, the rule of SPS itself is the different standards can be adopted by the countries, but based on non-discrimination principle and to protect animal and plant health. Then here we can very clearly say that the WTO members to form their regulations on health, safety standards to be adopted, ideally to be adopted by the three organizations. First we talks about the Codex Alimentarius Commission, which form the international standards for food safety. Then International Plant Protection Convention, IPPC, for plant health, and the World Organization for Animal Health. So, the Organization for Animal Health, earlier the name was OIE. So, the WTO members who wants to adopt these stringent standards, they can definitely adopt these international standards and made by these particular international organizations. And also you can see that this process is not only the products, but only the production and process the standards can be imposed, but the trade restrictive measures should be only to the extent of health, protecting health, a level of protection health, and there should be a consistency in the level of protection of health, and also there will be a comparable risk. So, different areas within a country requires may pose different levels of animal or plant health or disease risk, because different diseases may be affected by different regions. So, the same country to be adopt the different standards for different areas, different measures to be taken to protect that particular disease. For example, you can say the virus causing bird flu. So, if it is affected by a particular region, that particular measures to be taken imposed on that particular region. And SPS, so we continuously said that the SPS includes additives, contaminants, toxins, disease causing organisms in food, beverages and foodstuffs. So, the US and other countries, even Russia rejected our consignments of pepper. They said that there are some foreign materials in the spices like pepper. Many countries rejected, you can see the list publicly available. Why? It is mainly due to the additives or contaminants or toxins or disease causing organisms. So, we saw that most of the rejections salmonella. So, the excess pesticide residues, filthy. So, you can see various reasons which will come under these definitions. And with regard to these animal health or plant health, and the main concerns are spread of pest, spread of diseases and disease carrying organisms and disease causing organisms. So, at any cost, the entry of these pests or diseases or disease causing organisms should be stopped at the entry. That entry means the port of entry. So, people those who travel to other countries like Australia, the plant protection agency is very strict and they will ask you that what you are carrying. Are you carrying any seeds? Are you carrying any spices? Are you carrying any plants? Are you carrying any live animals? They will ask you these questions. So, this is mainly to protect the animal and plant health or protect the spread of these diseases or any kind of diseases or disease carrying organisms is passing over to their countries. So, these measures also include the SPS, and then most importantly the quarantine treatments. The quarantine of animals and plants are done at the entry of port. So, these are very important. So, the quarantine period, and they will see that whether there is any spread of disease or whether it is carrying any disease causing organisms, and the authorities get, plant protection agencies get a period of time for risk assessment. And also the labeling requirement is also one of the important criteria which we will see in the next lecture as TBT. So, the packaging criteria and labeling criteria is also very important with regard to SPS. That is why we study SPS and TBT agreement together. And again you can see that SPS allows independent standards for each and every country, not a single standard. So, the only reason which we have already said that it must be based on science, it should not be used as a barrier, and it should be only to the extent to protect the plant life, human life and animal life or health. So, arbitrary unjustifiable discrimination between countries are also not allowed. So, the members are encouraged to adopt international standards prepared by the international organizations like Codex or IPAC or OIE. So, food safety is one of the prime concerns of every country, because this food safety is some countries consider it as it's very highly threatened the human life or health. That is why you can see that in countries like the European Union, there is a very high standards of especially on food items, because the additives, contaminants, toxins and disease causing organisms, this is a concern of these particular countries. So, they adopt a higher standard not only for the domestic industry, but also for the all exports to be in conformity with these particular standards. And also which you can see that these standards to be applied uniformly to all the exporters. So, it means the cardinal principle of WTO, the principle of non-discrimination is applicable in SPS agreement as well. So, if you look into the contaminants, so you can see not only in food items or animals, but even veterinary drugs, the pesticide residues and other residue items also will be taken into consideration. And food safety measures, other food safety measures like labeling and quality, the nutritional value is also to be taken into consideration under another agreement, that is the TBT agreement. So, the SPS standards includes, there is no such standard is prescribed by the SPS agreement. So, it says that even the countries can adopt higher standards than the international standards, provided it is scientifically justified. But this higher standard imposition should be based on risk assessment. So, we will see elaborately the risk assessment in the next class, next lecture, and what do you exactly mean by a risk assessment. So, this is actually the extension of the principle, which you can see that precautionary principle. So, based on safety first and not always based on scientific evidence. So, this has happened to the EU B-hormone case and EU biotech case. So, safety first. So, the European Union went ahead with the ban of these particular products, and they were find it difficult to justify under scientific evidence later when it comes to the panel and appellate body. So, here we can see that we already talked about the standard setting organizations. So, food safety is the harmonization of these standards are done by these three organizations, and one is the Codex Alimentarius related to the food safety. Animal health is dealt by the World Organization for Animals or OIE, and the IPPC is concerned about the plant health. These are the three international organizations deal with international standards. They form international standards for each and every food items, animal health and plant health. So, here again consistency must be followed. So, this is mainly to avoid arbitrary distinctions. So, the appropriate level of SPS protection can be adopted at different situations. If a pandemic or in the case a disease, a particular disease is broke out in a particular region, the government can impose a separate standard. So, this cannot be considered as a discrimination, because this is required in order to quickly prevent the diseases from spreading to other areas. And least trade restrictive. So, the measures adopted must be least trade restrictive. So, even though we say that the countries are permitted to adopt their own standards, the protection should be based on non-trade restrictive and technically and economically feasible, and it must be less trade restrictive measure. Then equivalence. So, every country's standards are not same, then there is a problem of equivalence. So, other member countries standards you recognize other countries member countries standards, otherwise you will not be able to export. So, the question of equivalence is another problem in trade of food items and other items. And also we can see that regionalization, the prevalence of diseases are almost most of the time it is regional. So, the eradication programs of different agencies is based on regional basis. So, the criteria also to be developed on regional basis. So, the SPS committee issues guidelines with regard to the implementation of the effective measures based on regionalization. And also the committee have the inspection mechanism. So, in the case of the measures to be taken, so the committee visits. So, the inspection mechanism is also available under the WTO SPS committee. And you can see that transparency is one of the core principle of SPS agreement. So, every regulation, every law must be published and reported to the WTO SPS committee. Every country should notify an inquiry point, designate an office in every country as SPS inquiry point, and then all the regulations, international standards, national standards and relating to that particular area must be published. So, as I told many times that the SPS agreement never impose a uniform standard among the WTO countries, and what it imposes? It imposes certain principles and allow different standards for different countries. But the harmonization is a problem, and if you want to export a particular product to European Union, you have to comply with the European Union standards, you have to comply with the US standards. So, if your country have a lower standard, it is your problem, you will not be able to export a particular products into other countries. And the international the agencies, international institutions which form international standards play a very crucial role, because mostly and also the SPS agreement encourages members to adopt these international standards. So, these international standards are made by the three agencies based on scientific risk assessment, and scientific risk assessment is the process for determination of standards. And these regulations which you can see that in these export bodies which we already talked about, the three expert bodies. So, with regard to SPS agreement, we can say that SPS agreement is necessary to protect human health, animal health and plant health, and a separate agreement and international bodies are established to make international standards. So, the members are free to adopt their own standards rather than international standards. So, the only condition is that the standard, even a higher standard, adoption of a higher standard must be based on scientific evidence and it should not make a barrier to the trade. So, within the ambit of the agreement, SPS agreement, every country can make their own food laws, their own animal laws, their own plant laws to protect it from contaminants, residues and disease causing organisms. And if there is no product standard, these international organizations will help countries to adopt an international standard and which will be acceptable to the SPS committee as well as to the other members. So, but the SPS agreement never imposes an obligation on the members to adopt the international standards which are made by these organizations like the Codex, OIE or International Plant Protection. So, in conclusion, I would say that if you want to export, if you want to reduce rejections, export rejections from other countries. So, increase your standard, increase your food standard, increase your product standard, so that you will be able to export a good quality product to other countries. So, SPS agreement plays a crucial role in the export of products nowadays. And the next class we will see the risk assessment and also these especially the Codex standards. Thank you.